Who is the most overrated person in history? Tutankhamun, or King Tut as he is sometimes referred. He was a boy pharaoh that only reached the age of maybe 18, born from incest and suffered scoliosis, a bad foot, walked with a cane, and contracted malaria, and likely died from an infection from a broken leg. Also, when he came to power, married his sister and had 2 miscarriages. This poor boy had lots of power, but was sick all his life, and likely his advisors made all decisions for him and eventually succeeded him. Also had a very short reign that ended with Egypt at war. They would lose under his successor. Sadly, the royal family in Egypt at that time frequently married their half-siblings. The last doc I saw on Tut theorized that he broke his foot in a chariot race. He's not remembered because he was a great ruler, but because his pristine tomb was found. Tomb raiders have destroyed and stolen the contents of so many tombs that finding his tomb taught historians a great deal. So Tut wasn't the big deal, finding his intact tomb was. I think his tomb was also very plain when compared to the tombs of more important rulers. I can confirm that I have visited his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and it is knock your socks off incredible. I shudder to think at the treasures that would have been found in, say, Razi Zai's tomb. Also, I was wandering around the National Egyptian Museum, also highly recommend a visit, and turned around and fully unexpectedly found myself face to mask with Tut's death mask. I nearly fainted. I thought it was just a symbolic thing, never realized that it was real and that I'd be seeing it. Do you get a head buzz when in the presence of significant objects, either from my story or just culturally? It's happened to me in old churches, at art galleries, at the Taj Mahal, my first height of MT, Fuji, etc. I get all tingly and swimmy. Imagine being such a great ruler that you're buried with exquisite artifacts in a Borju tomb lined in gold or some shit, only to have all your shit stolen and some kid who did nothing, whose tomb looks broke compared to yours, become the most famous Egyptian ruler. The reason we care so much about him is because of his incredibly well preserved tomb. And it was only so well preserved because he was such a minor pharaoh that everyone forgot where his tomb was, and another pharaoh built on top of it, concealing the entrance. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have an exhibit of his stuff at my local museum and was super surprised to hear a lot of this. We don't know much about him, but can guess that he was really young, not really loved or cared about by the people, apparently liked hunting and racing chariots and stuff. He seems like he was just a regular rich kid who had some advisors that ran the country and kept him out of politics and ruling. When he died under unknown circumstances, they did the bare minimum and he was entirely forgotten. Thousands of years later, some struggling archaeologist who was just barely getting by and had almost zero funding and was ready to give up and go home in disgrace was poking around somewhere lame and accidentally stumbled upon his tomb and was all, holy shit, look at all this amazing stuff. Who is this guy? Besides his tomb, though, he was the son of Akhenaten, who was famous for believing in a single god. Under Tut, the pantheon was re-established by the priests who really had control for most of the young pharaoh's life. While he didn't do much, he actually does represent an important time in Egypt's history. Side note, while historians are fairly dubious about the Exodus occurring as described in the Bible, it's telling that Akhenaten was swayed by a monotheistic worldview at the time. Folks. He was a minor cog in a conspiracy that he didn't even know all that much about. He was tasked with a dead simple objective, and he failed. He gave up the names of all the co-conspirators that he knew about, but most of them operated on a much higher level than this chump, so they got off mostly scot-free. He had one job and he fucked up 3, basically. He doesn't deserve the pages that his story is written on in history books. I 100% thought this said Guy Fieri, and then I read the rest and thought I missed some huge news. Guy Fawkes Night. I still can't work out if most people are celebrating his attempt or his failure. It's catchier than its original name, Gunpowder Treason Day, which sounds more like a suggestion than commemoration. In fairness, I can't blame him for snitching on his compatriots. They had time and lots of very pointy and or hot instruments, and knowledge on how to keep someone alive quite a while with such things inserted in rude places. Yay. Reddit's talking like they wouldn't sell out their mum the second a red hot iron came within a foot of their face. Jack the Ripper. More overhyped, not overrated. But he only killed 5 people. It's not like he's the original Dexter. Yeah, I really hate this story. Overtold, over-theorized. Only reason no one has pinpointed him was because it was in 1888 before crime investigation matured and they didn't have the technology. Everybody talks about Jack the Ripper. Nobody talks about the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Everybody talks about the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Nobody talks about the Scranton Strangler. I personally don't think so. You have to understand that he was killing at a time the world was very different. Forensic science was just starting and widespread media was fairly adolescent. He had so many qualities that made him so famous. First, his name. Rarely has a serial killer name been so menacing or evil sounding. Next, the nature of his killings wasn't just straight up murders, but they were ritualistic and evil in nature. Next, his conversations with the press. He often sent taunting letters to the press and the police and was always steps ahead of them. This has been done by serial killers since, but he was the first to truly do it. And last but most important, he was never caught. They went through thousands of suspects and no one has ever been even close to figuring out who it was. It captures the imagination of everyone, much in the same way the D.B. Cooper mystery has. Yeah, people have killed more or in a worse manner, but no one captured the world's attention like old Jackie Boy did in the late 1800s. Beyonce. Her host, the wife of the owner of the Warriors, leans over her to ask Jay what he wants to drink. People see it, harass the woman to no end, and make it into a power moment for Beyonce. Don't get me wrong, she's a great artist, but people act like she's a god. Edit. To everyone saying it's not her, it's her fan base, would you kindly look up the definition of overrated? Her fans turn me off so much. I would like Beyonce if it wasn't for her fans. She's talented, just not as much as her fans make her out to be. You say one semi-negative thing about her and the beehive loses their minds. Ted Bundy. People claim that in terms of serial killers he had high intelligence. He didn't. He dropped out of law school because he couldn't keep up with his peers. So he was of average intelligence. He's just being compared with other serial killers who overall skew lower in terms of IQ. And no, his crimes weren't clever. He broke into the basement of a sorority house and bludgeoned 2 girls to death with a log from the fireplace while they were sleeping. The only reason he wasn't caught sooner was because the detectives working on the case were idiots and ignored multiple credible reports from Bundy's ex-wife. Stop romanticizing the guy. Outside of how nasty it is to hype up freaking serial killers, he, like all serial killers, was a gigantic turd sandwich. He wasn't smart, and his crimes weren't elegant or super planned out 4D chess murders. Don't believe the stupid dumb Netflix movie. Oh, and he admitted that after he tossed the bodies into a field because they were too badly decomposed to keep them in his house, he'd still go out there and sleep with them despite the fact that they were rotting and likely full of maggots and etc. Dude was sick. People need to stop romanticizing crime. Edit. For people picking apart the law school comment, what I said came directly from Ted Bundy's mouth in terms of the reason he dropped out. In August 1974, Bundy received a second acceptance from the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City, leaving Klopfer in Seattle. While he called Klopfer often, he dated at least a dozen other women. 110. When he studied the first-year law curriculum a second time, he was devastated to find out that the other students had some intellectual capacity, that he did not. He found the classes completely incomprehensible. It was a great disappointment to me, he said. This came from Polly Nelson's book, and she was one of his lawyers. So if you have issues with my comment about him not keeping up with his peers, that comes straight from Ted himself. Double edit. To whomever gave me silver, thank you. Usually I respond to the gilding message with a thank you, but I got up to clean my fish tank and came back to like 60 comments, so I got a little overwhelmed. I know the Netflix movie was not accurate. Ted Bundy romanticized himself. He didn't need to be romanticized because he did all of that on his own. He knew he was attractive and likable and he used that to his advantage. There were women fawning over him despite everything he was accused of at the time. What I don't like are people who say that Charles Manson was a genius. In no way, shape, or form was Charles Manson a genius, and his past interviews were just nonsensical bullshit that people read way too much into. Yup, Manson is a big dumb idiot that did some horrible things. He is the furthest thing from genius. He just used drugs to get people to listen to him and control them. What he did was terrible and he 100% deserved to die in that cell, but he is not a smart man. Mother Teresa. I think the world is being much helped by the suffering of the poor people. Mother Teresa, she earned billions and flew around in private jets. All the while, torturing ill or dying patients. She called her medical facilities houses of the dying, and they were exactly that. She didn't isolate patients with highly infectious diseases. She basically glorified her patients' suffering instead of treating it, withholding painkillers, so patients were left in agony. Used syringes were rinsed with water and reused. This was in 1991, for fuck's sake. And the Catholic Church made her a fucking saint. It's disgusting. She made billions? I've never heard this before. Is there any evidence? Any links to support this? Did she receive billions in donations and use these to help others? Waldo. Why should anyone even care to search for him? He's done nothing. The fact that he's always hiding is probably because he's done something wrong. Plus that fucker only has one shirt. Not the most overrated, but first guy that comes to mind is America's only Paul Revere. Don't get me wrong, yes, he was a good guy and he played a role in our nation's fate that night. But did you know he wasn't the only man on the midnight ride? A lot of the work and credit goes to his two peers that night. Revere only gets the credit because his name rhymed nicely in the poem written about him. I only know this because my grandma pointed out that we're related to one of the other two men, William Dawes. I'm too lazy to look up the other guy's name or how much of a role each of the three played in the event, but my basic memory tells me Revere wasn't the most critical player of the three. In fact, and I could be wrong, he got caught before he finished his role, which led the real heroism to one of the other two. Yeah. Thanks Paul Revere, but let's give credit to the other guys who warned us of the British that night. We can't all have nice sounding names, though, so your name is remembered while the other two have been forgotten by most, other than historians and nerds. Eater, I didn't expect this to be seen or for it to get all this attention. Not replying to everyone, but there's some good history facts in here and I'm learning some things about him and others. US history, especially with regards to war, isn't my top interest. I'm liking the conversation and seeing some healthy debate. Sorry if I sounded undereducated on this topic as I don't know it in great detail. This is Reddit, this is my opinion, and that was mostly detail from what I learned in K-12 school, but I'm done with my bachelor's now and K-12 was a long time ago. Also, this may be my top comment ever, so thank you everyone for the karma, but mostly the interesting facts and conversation here. I just had 100 plus notifications in my inbox yesterday and thought I marked them all as read, so I was really confused seeing all of this. 2 comments in 2 days hitting 6k plus karma. I just had a crummy night at the laundromat, so thank you for making that a little bit better. Large fucking Kossuth. He's a Hungarian history figure who lived 1802-1894, but most notably he declared himself as governor-president of the Kingdom of Hungary during the 1848-49 revolution. For those of you who are not really familiar with Hungarian history, the short version is, we were fucked by everyone and never had independence since the early 1300s. This time we had beef with the Habsburgs. We really wanted independence, have Hungarian as the official language and the liberation of the serfdom. Sounds cool. Before the revolution, the two most outstanding political figures were Kossuth and Count István Széchenyi. He's actually a really cool dude. And I think he deserved the title the greatest Hungarian. They both wanted the same things, but Kossuth wanted everything ASAP, whilst Széchenyi understood that change takes time. So of course they didn't like each other. With some other factors, Kossuth ended up bullying Széchenyi out of politics. I give Kossuth the credit for being smart and charismatic, who could motivate people with his speeches. So one time he basically started a rally amongst common folk, because other politicians told him that discrowning the king was a bad effing idea. But because of the massive amount of people surrounding them, they couldn't really say no. So they did discrown the king. During the revolution we sucked ass. Not getting into details, we had more downs than ups. Also some minorities revolted against Kossuth, who would not give them any rights. Enter one of my favorite historical figure, Artur Gudzsi. He was the greatest general in this whole scene. And finally he has his own exhibition. He actually won against some Austrian army corps. Kossuth hated him most likely because he feared his power and did everything to remove him from charge. But the Austrian king, Ferdinand V, asked the Russian emperor, Nicholas I, for help. So, Hungary is a small country with a small population. Russia on the other hand, you see where this is going. Gudzsi wanted to go west and destroy the Austrian army before the Russians arrive. Otherwise we're fucked. Sounds great. Not for Kossuth. He wanted to wait until the two armies merge in the east because if they lose, he can emigrate to Turkey. The latter happened, and Kossuth's LAS fucking move, stepped back from being governor president and appointed Gudzsi. A few days later on the 13th of August, it was clear that Hungary had lost. In a hopeless situation, Gudzsi signed a surrender at Villegas. Kossuth emigrated to Turkey, but tried to control everything from afar. Writing the Cassandra letter, that if we make peace with the Austrians Hungary will no longer exist. Which was bullshit. Our industry and agriculture fucking blossomed after. As a really great university professor once said, Kossuth threw a big rock up in the air and pushed Gudzsi under it. Basically he threw him under the bus. What baffles me about this absolutely garbage of a person, that he has the biggest mausoleum in all of Hungary. It's made out of gold, marble and all that jazz. You know what Gudzsi has? Oh effing black iron cross. God, I hate him so much. BTW, he died in Italy, and he still has a huge following because he was so great that every fucking town has to have at least one road named after him. I love this. I don't need drunk history, I need angry ranting history. Thanks for the education and entertainment. Ronald Reagan. He was always a popular president, but he has since been recast, mainly by conservative historians, as a great one as well. Yes, you can easily place him on that pedestal. You would merely need to ignore the Iran-Contra scandal, the huge budget deficits, his environment ignorance, his do-nothing reaction to the looming AIDS epidemic, his courting of Saddam Hussein, and numerous other blunders. And he didn't win the Cold War. The war in Afghanistan started in 1979. Reagan was still in California. Don't forget the failed war on drugs that led to mass incarceration and had zero impact on drug use. Reagan was actually a major fuck up, but he had a penchant for dropping pretty speeches on occasion and he was nice, so people forget that his policies continue to haunt the US to this day. P.S. He even backtracks on his tax cuts before he left office because he realized that they simply don't work. Edit. I know Nixon started the war on drugs, but Reagan threw gas on the fire. This caused the prison population to explode, which hit black and brown communities especially hard. Steve Jobs. He's overrated, because people think he was a great inventor or something, and he wasn't. But he's underrated too, because he was Apple's filter to stop horrible designs from getting out in the world, and Apple doesn't have one of those anymore. Software companies need a jerk. Jobs killed projects at Apple that were garbage. Now there's nobody like him left, and so we got the iOS Podcasts app, which was designed by morons. There needed to be some jerk at Apple with authority to say that's garbage, you can't ship it, fix it. As more and more Apple stuff gets rewritten, it's only going to get continually worse. Yeah, I hope Tim Cook is looking around for a replacement. Cook is great as a steward of a company keeping it afloat, but he really does not seem to have that I know what people want before they wanted thing Steve Jobs had, and honestly that is a very cult leader-like ability. Hillary Clinton. Now before you go all nuts on me, hear me out. Never before has a feminist ridden the coattails of their husband the way Hillary Clinton has. She moved from Arkansas to DC, then to NY and 6 months later was a senator from there? Come on. She was horrific to Barack in the primaries in 2008, why he gave her a job, I'll never know, and was entitled to the nomination in 2016. Hillary is no dummy, but if not for Bill, she would be a real estate attorney back in Little Rock. Henry Ford. In business, engineering, and manufacturing, he's revered like a god. Professors like to gloss over his overwhelming anti-Semitism. Ford wrote and published a wildly anti-Semitic newspaper, which was spread around the Ford Motors facilities. Those papers were republished in Germany and became incredibly popular with the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler described Ford as one of our most valuable, important, and witty fighters. Hitler praised Ford in Mein Kampf and referred to Ford as an inspiration. The admiration went both ways, because Ford was a Nazi sympathizer to the highest degree, hosting Hitler's representatives in his home and hobnobbing with Nazi officers. On his 75th birthday, he was awarded the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest medal Nazi Germany could bestow on an American. But all anyone cares about are his effing assembly lines which he didn't even invent. The assembly line idea actually came from Ransom E. Olds. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.